Good morning and good evening to our distinguished panelists and online participants. Welcome you all to ICAS 2021 Annual Conference on the prospect of U.S. China relations under Biden administration. My name is Nong Hong. I am the Executive Director of the Institute for China American Studies, an independent think tank based here in Washington, D.C. Our work is to facilitate exchange of ideas and research on many of the key issues affecting the U.S.-China relations that are in need of greater mutual understanding. The bilateral relationship between the two countries have never been tested so seriously as it is today. So in ICAS 2020 annual conference held last December, we talked about what could be the prospect of the bilateral relations after U.S. Presidential election, and we talked about the hope that President Joe Biden will once again return the bilateral relation to a more normalized track of engagement and dialogue. So today in our 2021 annual conference, we want to explore whether those expectations has been achieved or to what extent. So let me briefly highlight a few timelines of the bilateral engagement. In March, China and the US held the first high-level meeting in Alaska, and a month later, the two countries announced a joint statement addressing climate crisis. And in May, the two host the first trade talks since Biden took office. In early June, Biden expands the Trump era ban on American investment into Chinese firms. In the same month, a few days later, U.S. Senate passes the Innovation and Competition Act of 2021 to compete with China. And certainly there's a lot of development, as everyone aware. In November, on the 10th, China-US announced joint declaration on climate action. And 5 days later, President Biden and President Xi Jinping kick off their first virtual summit. And 1 day after, two countries relaxed their visa restrictions on each other's journal. And then a week later, US blacklists Chinese quantum computing companies. Today, President Biden is hosting a virtual summit for democracy in the White House. So the timeline shows the ups and downs of the bilateral relations engagement. And we're facing old and new challenges which continue to shape these important bilateral relations, which must adjust constructively. So dominance around the Pacific, strength in commerce, high-tech supremacy, human rights and freedoms, a voice in world leadership are the keywords that we're looking here today to define these bilateral relations. So under this background, ICAS 2021 annual conference aims at exploring what does 2022 hold for these political relations and what would be the emerging new normal look like in the future. We will also address bilateral and transnational challenges such as trade, technology, and climate change, and environment protection, among others. We look forward to our distinguished panelists' contribution to the discussion. As you're aware, this annual conference is being held in a hybrid format, so most of it's through the virtual format due to the global public health situation that we still face today. Before we start, I would like to thank our co-organizers and strategy partners, the National Institute for South China Sea Studies from China, and the China Program at Carter Center, and the China Forum of CISS and Tsinghua University that have been working with ICAS for many of our events. Without further ado, now I would like to invite Dr. Wu Shichun to give his welcome remark. Dr. Wu served as the chair of the advisory board of Institute for China American Studies, and he's also the founding president of China's National Institute for the South China Sea Studies and the chairman of board of directors of China Southeast Asia Research Center on the South China Sea. He's a key leading expert on maritime studies, particularly with the focus on the South China Sea. Quickly, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hong Nong, Deputy Chief of Mission and Minister Xu Xueyuan, former Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and the Pacific Affairs, Mrs. Susan Thornton, Professor Gordon Holden, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to our American participants and good evening to our Chinese participants. Allow me to express my warm greetings and welcome to you all who join this annual conference of the Institute for China-American Studies, ICAS in short. 7 years into existence, ICAS has established itself as a fresh voice in the Washington, D.C. think tank community. And I would like to extend my heartfelt congratulations to ICAS for the organization of this important event. The ICAS annual conference today is special, significant, and timely. It comes at a time when the China-US relationship is still struggling to move beyond the negative legacy of the Trump administration. The so-called Summit for Democracy being held today in the White House, just a few blocks away from the ICAS office. I guess it is going to kick off this morning. This summit features anti-mainland representation from the island of Taiwan, a perfect example of the virulent forces unleashed upon the bilateral relationship by irresponsible politicians of the United States. China condemns such provocation and connivance with the separatist forces on the island, and urges that the United States strictly adhere to its One China policy. The annual conference also comes at a time that is just 2 months shy of the 50th anniversary of the historical opening of China-US relations and a visit to China by President Nixon. The Nixon visit reminds us of the great possibilities inherent in China-US relations if there is concerted leadership commitment to the relationship. The Nixon visit took place at a difficult time in the international relations in earlier 1970s. So is it today when we face immense challenges in global governance, such as climate change, COVID-19, economic recovery, and global security management that are just as odious and require dedicated, joint, high-level commitment in Washington and Beijing? It is my hope that the United States will summon the resolve to work constructively with China to tackle these common challenges. At this time last year, during our ICAS annual conference, it was our hope that the election of the President Joe Biden, the United States-China relationship could return to the normal track of dialogue and cooperation after the destructive policy measures, including the trade war decoupling taken by the Trump administration. The hope was that the Biden administration could gradually return the relationship to the path of cooperation on many bilateral, regional, and multilateral challenges that China and the United States face today. This unfortunately has not fully turned out to be the case. It is true that the United States has stopped digging the bilateral relationship to the deeper hole over the past 11 months. In fact, there are a few positive developments recently, such as the return to China of Ms. Meng Wanzhou and the release of the 2 Michaels of Canada. The US reconfirmation, at least formally, of its long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan, and the joint statement at the recent climate change conference in Glasgow. On the other hand, the 2 sides remain locked in a lose-lose relationship and have failed to extricate themselves out of the hole that was dug by the Trump administration, and some negative actions of late by the Biden administration. For example, the attempted encirclement of China with the Quad and the signing of AUKUS with Australia and the United Kingdom have reinforced this trend. China is deeply concerned with strategic as well as non-proliferation dimensions of the AUKUS agreement. On November 16th, President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden held a long-awaited meeting, albeit virtually due to the COVID-19. In his remarks, President Xi Jinping suggested that the two sides adopt and adhere to the red line of peaceful coexistence. No conflict, no confrontation. For his part, President Joe Biden spoke of the need to manage strategic risks responsibly and equip the relationship with common sense guardrails to ensure that the competition doesn't veer into conflict. The two sides should now follow their respective approaches to a common red line based on which they build the relationship of constructive and cooperative coexistence. Returning to China-US relationship to the normal track of the constructive dialogue and cooperation is not only the correct choice, it is the only choice. In conclusion, it is my hope that this annual conference will come up with vibrant new ideas and solutions to the many challenges being faced within this all-important relationship, both now and in the days ahead. Like the relationship that our later leaders, Chairman Mao and President Nixon inaugurated 50 years ago, I hope this conference will also inaugurate an infusion of fresh thinking and the articulation of a new paradigm that could rehabilitate, revive, relaunch the China-US relationship on a stable track for the next quarter century, if not longer. Finally, I wish the ICAS annual conference a complete success. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Wu, for your great remark and your kind words about the ICAS annual conference. And I certainly share your views that returning the China-US relations to a normal track of constructive dialogue and cooperation is not only the correct choice, but that's the only choice. Now, please join me in welcoming Minister Xu Xueyuan, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of the People's Republic of China in the United States, and Professor Susan Thornton, Senior Fellow at Port China Center at Yale Law School, to share their views on China-US relations. This keynote dialogue will be moderated by Professor Gordon Holden, Director Emeritus of China Institute, University of Alberta in Canada. Prior to his academic job in U.S., Gordon was the former Director General of the East Asia Bureau of Canada's Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade. Gordon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Nong. It's my great pleasure to introduce our two keynote speakers today. I've had the good fortune to have met them both previously. First, Xu Xueyuan, Minister of the Embassy of the People's Republic of China, has been a minister at the Embassy of the PRC in the United States of America since 2018. She's responsible for subnational affairs, congressional affairs, and overseas Chinese relations. Prior to this assignment, she was Deputy Director General at the Department of North American and Oceania Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing. I would note that she has extensive experience on Canada-China relations as well. From 1996 to 1998, and again from 2001 2010, she worked in the North American and Oceania Affairs Department. She's also been posted to the People's Republic of China, Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. She is from Zhejiang Province, and Minister Xu graduated from Fudan University. Please proceed, Madam Xu. I'll introduce Mrs. Thornton subsequently.
Okay. Good morning and good night, dear friends. I'm so delighted to attend the 2021 ICAS annual conference and have a dialogue with Assistant Secretary Susan Thornton. This event is also a little bit personal for me, but because it helps to reconnect me with many old and new friends. I've known Chairman Hu and Mr. Gordon for many years, and also others like Mr. Liu Yawei, Professor Zhu Feng, and others. So really glad to see you, although cannot be meeting with you in person, but the replacement of a virtual meeting is so good. So I think Chairman Wu provided some background of today's ICAS event. I would like to start with providing some other background of this very important ICAS annual conference. I think it does happen at a very special time, right on the heels of two historic events. The first major event is the successful conclusion of the 6th plenary session of the 19th CPC Central Committee. At this plenary, the resolution on the major achievements and historical experience of the party over the past century was adopted, which reviews the CPC's major achievements and historic experience over the past century. Facts have proven that the CPC is one of the most successful political parties in the world, and socialism with Chinese characteristics is a most successful development path that fits China's conditions. The 10 points of experience summed up in the resolution hold the key to the CPC's success and answer the following questions, namely, why the CPC succeeded in the past, why Marxism worked, and why socialism with Chinese characteristics is good, for China. The resolution states that China will implement a more proactive opening up strategy, foster a pattern of opening up at a larger scale, a broader scope, and a deeper level, and build an open economic system that is mutually beneficial, diverse, balanced, safe, and efficient. I emphasize this part of the decision because I think it is most relevant to the outside world, including the United States. This shows that China, led by the CPC, will share development opportunities with other countries in the world. The second major event is the virtual meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Joe Biden. Yes, when Executive Director Hong outlined the timeline of what happened this year on bilateral relationship, she emphasized the high-level interaction between our two countries. But we think the most important and recent one is the very first virtual meeting between our two presidents. They exchanged views on issues of strategic, overarching, and fundamental importance, which will help steer the course of China-US relations. During the meeting, both presidents underscored the importance of a good bilateral relationship. And they agreed that we must get the bilateral relationship right and never mess it up. Both expressed their opposition to a Cold War, a new Cold War, so-called, or confrontation and conflict between China and the US. They sent a strong message to our two countries and the world that China-US relations should and must return to the right track of the sound and stable development. And the China-US relationship stands at a crossroads, as everybody of you will agree. We hope that the US will work with China, follow the spirit of the two presidents' meeting with concrete actions, maintain dialogue and communication, strengthen exchanges and cooperation, and manage differences in a responsible way, so as to promote sound and stable development of the bilateral relationship. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Xu, for your remarks. It's now my pleasure to introduce Susan Thornton, Senior Fellow of the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale Law School, and also non-resident Senior Fellow of the John L. Thornton China Center at Brookings. Susan Thornton is a retired senior U.S. diplomat with almost 30 years of experience in the U.S. State Department in Eurasia and East Asia. Until July 2018, Mrs. Thornton was acting Assistant Secretary for East Asia and Pacific Affairs at the Department of State and led East Asia policy making amidst crises with North Korea, escalating trade tensions with China, and a fast-changing international environment. In previous State Department roles, she has worked on policy towards China, Korea, and the former Soviet Union, and served in leadership positions at U.S. embassies in Central Asia, Russia, the Caucasus, and China. Now, she received her Master's in International Relations from Johns Hopkins School and her Bachelor's from Bowdoin College. Please, the floor is yours, Ms. Thornton.
Well, thank you very much, Gordon, my friend. It's great to see you, and Madam Xu Xueyuan. After a couple of years of hiatus, it's great to see you again. Madam Xu and I worked very closely together at various points in the past on U.S. China relations, and I am glad to see you there in the embassy in Washington. I wish I could see all of the friends on the screen in person, and I hope to be able to actually visit China at some point soon, but maybe it's not going to be for still a while yet. I will speak very briefly because I really was hoping that this could be somewhat of a discussion. But I note that a lot of people today have talked about, a returning to the track and sort of going back to engagement and this kind of thing. And I want to make clear that I don't speak for anyone at this meeting other than myself, and certainly not for the US government. But I think what we have to all acknowledge is that over the last certainly 5 years, the world has really changed. And I don't think that it's possible. A lot of people are talking about going back to before. We hear this a lot in domestic politics in the US. We hear it a lot around the world. And I think it's just clear that we're not going to go back to where we were before. I think there are two views on how the world has changed, particularly in Washington, and also in the broader sort of public consciousness. And the first of those is that the world has changed because we now have returned to an era of major power competition that is distinguished by its sort of zero-sum character. And Professor Wu Shicun mentioned this kind of lose-lose dynamic. That's one view of how the world has changed, and that would lead to a prescription of what has to follow from that. There's another view, though, about how the world has changed. And that view says that principal source of insecurity in the world is coming from transnational threats that are going to get much worse in the future. And in some cases will come from vectors that we haven't even foreseen yet or begun to kind of address yet. But certainly the current ones that are making people very insecure in countries all around the world are the pandemic and climate change. And the feeling that people get from both, I think, of these two views is that, the world has become very unstable. People around the world are becoming more and more insecure, and governments seem to be less and less able to deliver security for their people. And I think that is leading to a lot of disruption in the world. And some might even see that we're going to be faced with changes unseen in a century. And we hear this all the time from the government in Beijing. So I think, you know, what we can't do is probably we cannot prosecute major power competition in a lose-lose dynamic, while at the same time effectively addressing the source of insecurity for a lot of the other people in the world, which is these transnational challenges. I think that that will prove to be an impossibility, and we're working our way through that right now. And you can see the tension. I think it's pretty obvious. Now, I think Professor Wu Shutsun is exactly right about the difficulty of leaders to come out and address these issues, and to you know, be bold and show vision as President Nixon did in 1971. But I think, and here I would associate myself with the comments in the Financial Times by former Deputy Secretary of State Robert Zoellick, former U.S. Trade Representative, where he made the comment that we really do need to see some bold leadership right now to make sure that the not just U.S. China relationship, but because that relationship is going to affect how we treat these future threats and challenges, the whole world needs to see leadership from the United States and China to drive this relationship in a direction that's more productive. And here I would say that because, and Madam Xu Shuiyuan talked about the conclusions that came from the 6th plenum of the Central Committee recently about China's system. I personally think that we should not be emphasizing ideological competition between the United States and China, because I think it's a misdirected use of our resources and energy, and it, I think, reveals some insecurity on the part of both governments. But I do think that China has some advantage in going first. You know, the US maybe went first in the 1970s to make that bold step, and Nixon going to Beijing. You know, China doesn't have the same kind of pressures from public opinion that the United States has, and so has more, in my view, diplomatic space to come forward and make a bold move to try to move this relationship in a more productive direction. I won't say back to the track, because I don't think we'll go back there, but we need to move forward and tackle some of these you know, really serious challenges that are driving insecurity around the world, and frankly leading to considerable instability outside of the US-China relationship that we will have to deal with in the future if we don't tackle it in a mature and visionary way now. So I'll just stop there, and maybe we can have some discussion. Thanks, Gordon.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. I'm going to pose a question to you both. And I realize, Susan, you just indicated the need to avoid ideology, but before you, at least for those of you who are in Washington today, President Biden's hosting the virtual summit for democracy in the White House. And for Minister Xu, what is the Chinese government's view of the Democracy Summit and your view on Taiwan's participation in the proceedings? Do you see this democracy versus authoritarianism dichotomy becoming a staple of media discussion in the years ahead? Or is it your view that this framework of these two rival systems will fade away in the weeks and months ahead? Perhaps I'll put that one to you, Minister Xu, since we've heard a view already from Ms. Thornton. I'll ask the next question to her directly. Madam Xu.
Yes. First of all, I think I want to echo what Assistant Secretary Susan Fountain said in her opening remarks. I think it's very insightful. Nobody should expect the bilateral relationship to go back. I cannot agree with you more that we need to look forward and to push the relationship forward. And we needed to work together to avoid major power competition. And we do not want to see a lose-lose scenario. We want to try our best to seek a win-win scenario. Win-win, the concept of win-win is very much misinterpreted in the United States as China wins 2 times. That is absolutely not true. We want to seek win-win result for both countries. And also, I totally agree that the world is looking at China and the United States to take the leadership to tackle many transnational threats, especially the pandemic, COVID-19. So in terms of Gordon's question on the Summit for Democracy, I just heard some fraction of President Biden's speech before I came to participate in this annual conference. I think Western democracies, as far as I know, has its roots in the city-state system of anthems in ancient Greece. Its essence is full participation and a majority decision. Correct me if I'm wrong. The U.S. prides itself as a beacon of democracy, but its democracy is now a far cry from its forefathers' intention. I think if you look at President Joe Biden's speech, you will find that he also agrees this opinion. According to a recent poll of Harvard Kennedy School, 39% of respondents believe that U.S. democracy is in trouble. 13% believe that it is failing, and only 7% believe that the U.S. is a healthy democracy. And a recent Pew poll of 17 democracies found that only 17 of respondents thought the U.S. remained a model democracy. Freedom House, its statistics was also quoted by President Biden. Freedom House latest report downgraded the state of U.S. democracy to below Chile and Costa Rica. Can you believe that? So on the contrary, I have no intention to make comparison on which is good and which is bad. I mean, in terms of a model of development, in terms of a form of democracy. As I emphasized in my opening remarks, the China's model only fits China's national condition. I think China also prides itself of its own democracy. We call it a whole process democracy, which can better reflect, in my opinion, full participation and a majority decision. In China, the people have the right to election, and they can get deeply involved in national governance. On matters concerning people's key interests, there are broad-based and sufficient consultations and discussions before any decision is made. Policies and measures can only be introduced when there is a consensus that they are what the people want and will serve the people's needs, of course, the majority of the people, right? For example, in the drafting process of the resolution I mentioned earlier, we solicited opinions, comments, and suggestions from various localities, departments, and sectors. A total of 547 revisions were made to the preliminary draft of the decision of the 6th plenary. The Standing Committee of the Political Bureau met 3 times and the Political Bureau twice for the purpose of discussing and finalizing the draft. The current draft is a product of these meetings. So I'm just trying to give some example of how China conducts its own democracy. In terms of Taiwan, I think it is totally a wrong decision for the United States to participate. Taiwan, whoever the authorities, Taiwan authorities, representative to participate the summit. No matter what form its participation will takes or who will represent it at the summit. I think they have several representatives. As we speak, Taiwan suffers from prevalent populism, intense ethnic conflicts, and rampant separatism. These all hurt people's livelihood and the economy, and the Democratic Progressive Party's policy causes deep political fear in Taiwan. These are not the conclusion or the judgment of the Communist Party on the mainland. Actually, I make these analysis according to news reporting and discussions in Taiwan. So many Taiwanese citizens population, they doubt that this is genuine democracy. More importantly, Taiwan is a province of China, and the U.S. inviting this province to the summit is just unreasonable. It violates the One China principle and the 3 Sino-U.S. joint communique. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Su. Now, I have a number of questions before me. We have limited time, but I'm going to pitch one on Taiwan directly to you, Susan. This is an audience question. The U.S. senior officials have made a lot of bold statements on Taiwan. Do you think the U.S. is abandoning its One China policy? Ambassador Roy said to restore the status quo in Taiwan, straight, the U.S. needs to restore China's confidence in U.S.'s One China policy. Your views, please.
Sure, thanks, Gordon. And can I just respond a bit to Madam Xu's earlier comments?
Absolutely,
Because I think, first of all, I don't think China needs to spend much energy and time on writing reports or assessing American democracy, because, we are the chief critics, analyzers, and, foundational kind of spade workers to try to repair our democracy. And we are the first people to admit when things are not right with it. And we work and constantly criticize ourselves to try to make improvements. Sometimes it's not easy to make those improvements, but I would say that in general, most of the citations in the Chinese criticisms of democracy come from American news reports and et cetera. So I just think it's better for China to, look at its own issues and talk about those. I mean, one of the iniquities, of course, in U.S. China relations is that the U.S. is so open. We have this cacophonous bottom-up system, and it's all very transparent. And so it's very hard for a lot of people to understand China's system, and China always expresses frustration with that. But to some extent, it's because, there's just not the level of information available and transparency about what's going on there. Second, I would just say on the issue of sort of democracy and, let's be clear. I mean, democracy is about people having genuine choice in choosing their leaders. Now, this is a complicated question, but what the bottom line is it's about having the legitimacy from the people to govern. China goes about getting legitimacy for its system of choosing leaders in a different way. I think it is constantly worried about that legitimacy question. And I think in the US and in democracies where people have chosen leaders, at least that's not an issue as far as the legitimacy of the chosen leader. They have a mandate from the people. So, I mean, I think, we have to be clear about what it is that we're talking about. I mean, I think probably there are cases where, a country could be a democracy and also an authoritarian country where people chose the leaders and then those leaders governed in an authoritarian way. And I guess the question would be whether the democracy was strong enough to get those authoritarian leaders out after a period of time. And I think on that score, the U.S. Did prove something in the recent past, but we'll see how things evolve. But we're certainly working on it. On Taiwan, I would say that the U.S. position in Taiwan is, of course, that we want to maintain the status quo. And the problem is that the status quo has been moving, and by all parties, but particularly, I think, by, in the case of Beijing, sense that there is an urgency, an ambition, and an intention to press the timeline to change the status quo and the timetable for reunification. And I think to some extent, the US has been responding to that. I do believe that the US needs to convince China of its adherence to its one China policy, based on the 3 joint communiques. In the case of China, of course, the administration has been stressing the Taiwan Relations Act because they say that that's where the deterrence comes in, that's in response to the changes to the status quo that they perceive from the Chinese side. So that's why they're stressing that. But I think we heard President Biden, of course, reaffirm the US one China policy. They have stated clearly they have no intention of changing the position of strategic ambiguity. And they have sort of talked about the 3 joint communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, et cetera, in terms of the standard policy. But I do think that there needs to be discussion of this issue between the mainland and Washington, because I think the signal sending that is happening on Taiwan is not being, we've been estranged from each other by the pandemic for more than 2 years. We can have some video chats among officials, and we have officials in embassies like Madam Xu, but it's not the same as having regular meetings, and the signals are not being read accurately, I feel. And the situation is getting, I feel, quite unstable, and I'm very worried about it.
Thank you, Susan. A question now for Mr. Xu. Is there a timeline for China relaxing its zero COVID restrictions that would allow avoidance of a long period of quarantine? I think many of the speakers in the audience here would be interested in this question. And then a related question, are there any plans for President Xi to travel abroad in the first half of next year? Minister, please.
Yes. Susan said in her opening remarks that she really wanted to go back to China. I do, fully understand, and I do hope personally that borders of all countries can be reopened to the outside world, but unfortunately, we are still under the very tragic situation of COVID-19. The fact is, maybe we still need to wait for some time to get total normalcy. China's zero COVID strategy we adopted since last year have been questioned and criticized by many Western people or news or media outlets. But surprisingly, after the outbreak of Omicron, we find that many U.S. and other international Western media outlets reports, including, for example, Bloomberg, New York Times, reported that the Omicron variant has caused many countries and regions to impose border and travel restrictions. But for China, it is business as usual. It is business as usual in China, because we have started this very abnormal measures since last year. And these media used to doubt, as I said, China's policy. But now they think that China is right. So I think it is very interesting to observe for Westerners. It's very important for them that China adopts this concept of putting people and their lives first. So this is the basic consideration and the goal of our measures. At present, we will still try our best to clear all the cases, and we will also monitor the developments of the pandemic to decide on our response measures and make corresponding adjustments to our border control policies when safety can ensured. I also want to emphasize that it's very important to continue to keep communication on important issues, on the agenda of the bilateral relationship, and also domestic policies. For example, on Taiwan, we think we do have lots of misunderstanding on each side. If the hen and chicken, I mean,
Chicken and the egg.
Chicken and hen, yeah. So many American friends believe that the U.S. side now is taking a reaction to China's more provocative action on Taiwan. But in our opinion, we are taking reaction to the independence forces in China, which has been trying to work together with the international supporters, including the United States, to seek agenda that will jeopardize China's goal of achieving unity. I think one very dangerous theory or policy, maybe a hidden policy in the United States, is Taiwan's status remain unsettled or undetermined. This is very, very dangerous. I think the U.S. policy has been based upon, drafted and implemented based on this belief or this theory. I just want to reiterate that there is only one China in the world. The government of the People's Republic of China is the sole legal government representing the whole of China, and Taiwan is a part of the Chinese territory. If China and the United States can come to this conclusion and can handle the issue of Taiwan based on this widely recognized the fact by the international community, Taiwan wouldn't be a problem at all. But unfortunately, we are yet to reach consensus on this very basic fact. So I think interaction between academias like ICAS and others, Brookings or CSIS, are extremely important, and there are lots of discussion on the issue of and others. So we in the embassy, we will save no effort to help to connect, even virtually, the Chinese academia and the U.S. academia. So people, experts in those areas can have more serious discussion on what is going on and what's the way forward. And in terms of domestic issues, I think it is also very important, especially at the time of the pandemic in this time of moment, because we cannot visit each other. So it is very important to read the text of Chinese Communist Party documents. Well, whether it is transparent or not, the Chinese system is very different from the U.S. system, right? But all the most authoritative message of the policies and how we can better understand the intention of those policies and what is the thinking behind these policies come from the official documents of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government, governed by the Chinese Communist Party. That's the reason why I emphasized the resolution of the sixth plenary session. And in terms of, if China is perfect or not, whether China is ready to review its own issue, I think we do. But we reviewed our problems and mistakes in a different way. So I want to refer everybody to the resolution adopted at the fourth plenary session of the CPC. This is about governance. Updating and fixing a lot of problems that is going on, that happens during the process of reform and opening up and development. That is an extremely, extremely important document to understand how the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government reviews and acknowledges its mistakes, its shortcomings, and how it is determined to fix these problems. Thank you very much.
Very much, Mr. Su. We have limited time, but I thought to try and squeeze in a couple more questions with brief replies. And first, this is one for each, but I ask the replies to be very simple, although the question is not simple. This comes from a panelist. What are the most immediate actions that each side could take today that would improve the relationship beyond just more meetings? Susan, please. A simple question.
Well, I personally, if I was going to pick one issue, I would say that Taiwan is the most urgent issue on which we would need to have better communication and get some understandings more clearly communicated. So maybe that's not beyond more meetings, but I think reaffirmation of the status quo and the understandings that each side has around that is extremely urgent. And if we could do that, I think it would certainly set a foundation to do more, or at least have sort of the downward spiral, kind of stemmed and make possible movement in other areas. I know there's another question here about guardrails, and the Biden administration talks about peaceful competitive coexistence. And I think the guardrails have to do with not letting the relationship get worse or off track or out of control. So those aren't really things that are going to make improvements. If we want to do improvements, I would say we would focus on those transnational challenges that I mentioned in my opening remarks, because those are the areas where both the U.S. and China have major capacities and where the competition is denying, a certain amount of progress and response to these problems.
Thank you. Mr. Su, briefly, what is one or two steps that you think would, in effect, move things forward other than simply meetings?
Oh, yes, I agree with Susan's comments 100%. First of all, we have to reduce the risks. Taiwan is certainly the single one most dangerous issue that can result in confrontation and conflict and even hot war between the two countries. And but I want to point out that we might want to take a more positive actions that is focused on the huge potential for the two sides to work together on both bilateral fronts and also international areas. Susan talked about, you know, to deviate of energy to meet the challenge, the global challenge facing everybody. I agree with her 100%, including climate change, including you know, public health issues. But I think at the same time, we can also focus more on the potential, huge potential of cooperation bilaterally, including trade. For example, we can think about reduce the tariffs, because the United States has not been able to benefit at all with the trade war launched by the Trump administration since he took office. Actually, last year, deficit increased by a big margin. And import from China, trade between our two countries, including import from China to the United States, increased sharply. And the ordinary American people have to bear the burden of the tariff. So why not take down the tariffs? And also people-to-people relationship. I think the United States need Chinese students learning. They need to stay in the United States to make contribution to U.S. development and innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Time being our enemy, I'm going to pose the last question to Susan Thornton. And this is based on a remark recently, I think it was on a CNN interview, when the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that the Biden administration had no intention to repeat one of the mistakes of previous China policy, and that is to seek to bring about fundamental change to the Chinese system. I do recall that this was, at a time, a fundamental plank for China policies of many Western countries, not just the United States. Would you concur, Susan, with Jake Sullivan's comment?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I understand what he's trying to say, which is that there's a belief in China that the U.S. is trying to undermine or overthrow the fundamental, governing system of China. And in fact, in the previous administration, there were some comments made that pretty directly hinted at that was U.S. policy. I think, frankly, that's never been U.S. policy toward China. Certainly, there was a lot of stress on kind of human rights issues as being the major driver of U.S.-China relations from the U.S. perspective in the Bill Clinton administration for a little while, and then that changed a bit. I think what he means is we're not out to overthrow the Chinese system, but we do have problems with certain aspects of Chinese behavior that are maybe driven by that system. And we have said very clearly that we expect China to follow international law, rules, norms and standards that have been developed in the international community, have a level playing field in trade. And I think those are the kinds of changes that we will certainly be seeking through negotiations and other kinds of tools in the diplomatic relationship. But fundamentally overturning the system, I think, is what he was talking about. But now we have this democracy summit that seems to set up this dynamic between, a Chinese system and a U.S. type system, which sort of brings into question what he said. But I think it remains the case, obviously, that the U.S. is not seeking to overthrow or change the Chinese system in any fundamental way.
I'm determined to try and keep things time sensitive and on track. Given that our time has been exhausted, I'd like perhaps to bring this initial keynote session to a conclusion, and thanking you both for your insights and even consensus on the question of needing to address the Taiwan issue in some fashion. Thank you both. Applause is not possible in the virtual session, but I applaud you both for your contribution to this session. Thank you.